viewers. This is still CS Academy, and we're back again to continue with questions from diagrams and calculations in economics. Don't go anywhere, we'll be right back. Now, from the diagram we have on the board, we have a question coming from the subtopic in economics known as indifference curve and budget line. Now, indifference curve and budget line analyze two commodities that a consumer can consume, spend money on, having a particular budget. So the budget line is actually the amount reserved for the consumption of these two commodities, while the indifference curve shows the different level of utility that can be derived. Anyway, we're not going into the topic indifference curve analysis and then budget line. So let's just go straight to the question. Now, for every indifference curve, it comes with different level of satisfaction. And it's something the examiner is trying to equilibrium of a consumer, where you have two budget lines. The equilibrium of a consumer is always at a point where the budget line is tangent to the indifference curve. Tangent to the indifference curve, I mean where the budget line cuts the indifference curve at the lowest or minimum point. And you can see that happened at two spots. So how do we decide the one that will be preferable eventually if this is a question in the exam hall? Now, a rational consumer will want to consume at a higher level of indifference curve, because that's where he or she is going to get a higher level of utility, satisfaction. So this is one equilibrium point of a consumer. This is another equilibrium point of a consumer. But when you have more than one in an exam hall, the highest equilibrium point is preferable. So looking at this question, point K, rational consumer, is the best equilibrium point. And then anytime, any day, even if they increase it to 3, you have a third one. Just apply the same knowledge. It's the highest level of utility or satisfaction that every rational consumer will prefer. So if that equilibrium point happens at this highest point, then it becomes your most preferred equilibrium point. And that's why K is our answer for this question, because K happens at the highest equilibrium point from what we can see on the diagram. For this next question, we have something similar to the indifference curve and budget line. You can see the resemblance, but we have something under production theory which has to do with iso-cost, iso-quant. The iso-cost is the budget line of the producer, while the iso-quant is the indifference curve of a producer. So while the consumer deals with indifference curve, the producer deals with iso-quant curve. While the consumer deals with budget line, the producer deals with iso-cost curve. So we can bring in the same knowledge here. The examiner is talking about equilibrium of a consumer under indifference curve and budget line. And now for production, which is iso-cost, iso-quant, the examiner is talking about the optimum point of production. We can bring in the same knowledge. Check the minimum point where the iso-cost curve is tangent to the isoquant curve. Now we have just one isocost curve, and it goes this way. It cuts the second isoquant curve at the minimum point. So it's tangent to the isoquant curve at this point. That's your optimum point of what? Production. This is because the budget of the producer, which is the isocost curve, can actually attain production at this point. Can't attain production at this point, but not reasonable if we decide to produce here when our budget can actually get us what production at this point. So if you're looking at this diagram and bringing the knowledge of indifference curve analysis and budget line, you can just go straight to the optimum point of production to be at point S. And that's option C. Anytime, any day, that's your correct answer. We can't actually make it option R because we cannot incur the cost of production at that point. Our budget or resources available for production cannot meet production at R. For us to go to produce at R, the isoquant curve, the quantity to be produced here, will require an increase in our budget or resources under production. So that's why R cannot be our answer. Now, we're looking at a question produced from the topic in economics called cost theory. Now, the theory of cost has some concepts. And these concepts cut across total cost, variable cost, fixed cost, average cost, marginal cost, average fixed cost, average variable cost. When looking at this question, we'll pick the components or the concepts represented here and then use them to solve the question. This question says, given that the fixed cost is 1,000 naira, total variable cost is 2,500 naira, and the output is 100 units. Find the average total cost of production. No big deal. We realize that there are two ways to go about this. But if you actually want to accommodate all the components or concepts mentioned in this question, we have to go the way of applying or introducing fixed and variable cost into the formula of total cost. And you can recall that whenever we have total cost, it is equal to fixed cost plus variable cost. Note that. But the examiner says we should find the average total cost. Average total cost is same thing as average cost. So let's give it the short name that people can flow with. Average cost is total cost over quantity. And the examiner have already given us the unit here. This is the quantity. Don't forget. So let's just represent them. Where TC is equal to total cost, FC is equal to fixed cost. Just for clarity, please, VC is variable cost. So even if the examiner calls it total variable cost, is still the same thing. Total fixed cost, they all mean the same thing. So fixed cost is the same as total fixed cost, variable cost is the same as total variable cost, so that we don't get confused. From the values we have in the question, we can reproduce this formula and then have average cost will now be equal to, instead of putting up total cost, we replace it with this. You understand? So we have fixed cost plus variable cost over quantity. If fixed cost is equal to, they said is 1,000 naira, and then variable cost is equal to, what do we have? We have 2,500 naira. And they said output, which is quantity, is equal to 100 units. Then average cost will be equal to 1,000 naira plus 2,500 naira all over 100. we can bring the rest of the calculation here. So we have average cost is now equal to the sum of 1,000 plus 2,500 will give us 3,500. Let's maintain the Naira for those having to write prospective university exams or probably O-level exams. Please, you must maintain the Naira sign or probably the value of the currency represented in the question. Over 100, the 2 zeros will disappear and then we'll have 35 Naira. 35 Naira means that option B is our correct answer. So anytime, any day, look at the technicality in the question, link the formulas to each other, and then produce a general formula that you will use to solve the question. And after going through all this, what we have been able to derive is 35 Naira as our what? Average total cost. And that ends it. The next question we have here is a question from the basic tools of economics analysis, what you popularly know as statistics in mathematics. And this question is talking about standard deviation and variance relationship. The examiner says, if the standard deviation of a given data is 53, what is the variance? If you have watched our old videos on this same calculation and diagrams, we have a similar question that we have actually presented the same shortcuts to. Now, 53 is the given data for the standard deviation. What's the relationship between standard deviation and variance? In the last video, I made you guys understand that the standard deviation is just the square root of variance. Let's bring that knowledge back, because SD is equal to square root of V. We have V variance, so where SD is equal to standard deviation, don't forget for clarity, and then V is equal to variance. Please, let's take note of that. Now, if we have these two, we can come back to say, what's the value of my standard deviation? Is that what's given in the question, 53? They said 53, we just go with then 53 is equal to square root of V. What do? We square both sides. Square both sides. So if I'm looking for a square of 53 against the square of the square root of V. So the square takes the square root out, and then we have 53 raised to power 2 to deal with. Now let's do a little analysis here. If we have 53 square, it gives you 53 times 53. Mathematically, we go with 3 against 3, that's 9. 3 against 5 gives you 15. So we have 5, then 1 goes up here. 5 against 3 is 15. You have, okay, this comes in here. 5 against 3 gives you 15. 5 and then 1 goes up. 5 against 5 gives you 25 plus 1, that gives you 26. So if we sum this up, it gives you 9, 0, 1, and you have 6 plus 1, that's 7, plus 1, that gives you 8, and then 2 comes down. So 2809 is option C. And within 15 seconds or 20 seconds, you can use that shortcut to get this done. And that's now the question we have here is a question from the theory of demand as a topic. Now for theory of demand, we have considered differences in changes in demand and changes in quantity demanded. If you have not checked that video, please go look for it, on YouTube. That video is going to actually help you understand slightly what we have on the board. Now we're looking at shift in demand here, and shift in demand, which is represented with that movement. Okay, the movement is D1, D0, D0 to D1, D1. You can see that it's an outward shift. An outward shift shows an increase. An increase in demand is represented with the option we have at option B. Now, option A is not going to be correct, which is also considerable, but not correct because it's the opposite of what's going on here. A fall in the demand curve, it's a shift in the demand curve to the left. This is to the right. To the right shows increase, and that's not a fall because this is decrease. So option A is wrong for that reason. Option C is wrong because option C only mentioned extension. Extension is like talking about change. Change can be positive or negative. If it is positive, then it's a rise. If it's negative, then it's a fall or decrease. Now, this examiner for option C is not specific, and we cannot just centralize our option. We have to be specific. So this is not correct for that reason. Option D says none of these curves. No, we have one, which is option B, and that represents increase. That's rightward shift, and that shows a rise in the demand curve. That's just the correct answer. Anytime, any day. Let's go with this other question, which is a diagram generated from the topic in economics known as production possibility curve, PPC. In our last question related to this, from this topic, I also made you understand that production possibility curve can also be called production possibility frontier. And frontier means it can also be called PPF. So if you have not watched that video where we explained calculation and diagram, taking a question from production possibility curve also, you need to go and look for it because it's a different question. So we're coming to something else entirely now, but from the same topic. Now, this question says, in the diagram above, full employment is indicated by what? From all the alphabets you can see on the board, take note. Production possibility curve. The country has a set, amount or quantity of resources that they want to actually channel to the production of this commodity and this commodity. If the production possibility curve for that country reads this way, it means that they have resources at this level. If this is the amount of resources they have, if they decide to produce here, it means that they have not employed all their resources into production if they decide to produce here. N shows underemployment. It's feasible we can produce here, but it doesn't make sense producing here when you can produce at a higher level, which is at point M. And take note, full employment. If this is underemployment, then it means that the point where our resources can carry is recognized as what? Full employment. P is another point, but non-feasible. Why is P not feasible? Because our resources cannot carry production at that point. What it takes to get to P is an increase in resource availability, be it level of technology or population. We would need to improve in our resources availability to be able to produce at P. So from what we have on the board, full employment is indicated by the point M. And the reason have been stated during the explanation. That ends it for this question. For this other question, we're considering a question from national income accounting. And this national income accounting question is not a regular question that you find, because in most cases from the questions we have taken so far, you find questions where the examiner wants to test just the equilibrium level of national income. So you have the sector models represented in the income formula, probably Y is equal to C plus I or C plus I plus G and all that. But now the examiner is going deep, wanting to know if we know how this reaction between the component of national income are related to multiplier. Now, average students will know that multiplier, which is represented with K or M sometimes, is equal to 1 over 1 minus MPC or 1 over MPS. But most students do not know that the definition of multiplier makes multiplier have a second formula, which is change in income over change in maybe investment, because of the case we have at hand. If this were to be consumption, then this would have replaced I with C, which becomes change in consumption. If this were to be government expenditure, would have replaced this with G. If this were to be export, would have replaced this with X. If this were to be import, this would have been M, showing that it is not just one national income component that can be considered here. It is the rate of change in income or national income due to or as a result of change in any national income component, which can be investment, consumption, government expenditure, export, or what? Import. But because we're not going deep into national income as a topic, let's go straight to the point. So knowing this as one of the formula, and also knowing 1 over 1 minus MPC as the second formula. Note, the reason why we're combining this for clarity, multiply, which is M, maybe I can take it in full so that multiplier is equal to change in what? Over change investment, or 1 over 1 minus MPC, or 1 over MPS. So we're giving it 2 because of the information we have. We have MPC, that's why we picked this. And then we have investment, that's why we considered this. So don't get confused. We'll move on with this, and I'll come in here. When we come in here, we need to realize that these values, these components have their values. But change in investment is equal to what we have from the diagram, from the question we have on the board, 100 million. So if this is 100 million, we're going to ignore the million and I'll bring it back when we have to find our answer. Now MPC is equal to 2 over 3. And this is not the regular way of representing MPC, but we can use it like that to avoid the use of calculator. So bringing back this, please, we can now say then change in Y, which is income, over 100 is equal to 1 over 1 minus, my MPC is 2 over 3. If I have to put up the mathematical knowledge to this, we have 1 over, please, instead of finding the LCM, we can actually go straight by doing 3, 1, that's 3, minus 2, that gives us 1 over 3. Please, it's the same thing as finding the LCM, which is 3, and then you have this to be over 1. You have 1 in 3 gives you 3, and I have 3 times 1, which is 3, minus 3 in 3 gives you 1. 1 times 2 gives you 2, so no big difference. Don't get confused. This is how I got this. And then we proceed. In mathematics, there's something we call law of indices. If I'm to change my denominator, my division to multiplication, I will take the inverse of my denominator. So this gives me 3 over 1. If that gives me 3 over 1, I think we can bring it back here to continue. Take note. We can have change in Y is equal to 100 times 3. You know how that works. My change in Y is equal to 300. So if 300 are bringing in the million, 300 million is our correct answer, and that's option B. So no thinking is required. Be careful with this. If you pretend to use a calculator here, you might just get a different answer, because approximation of the decimal point might just give you something similar or near. Maybe you might just fall into the trap of having 303 as your answer, which is risky. So let's maintain the law of indices and make sure we get the perfect answer, which is 300 million. And that makes option B our best answer. Okay, viewers, with this we have come to the end of today's session of calculation and diagram questions in economics. We'll be back to continue from where we stopped. But don't forget to follow the trend of questions we have on YouTube so far. Don't forget also to click on the like button, subscribe button, turn on your notification, and also leave a comment. It's still CS Academy. Thank you for being with us.